Hello friends, in today's lecture we'll talk about Hindi films and Gulzar. As all of us are aware that how Hindi cinema has influenced so many people and the kind of contribution which has been made by some of the filmmakers, lyricists, etc. to the Hindi cinema has been immense. So in that context, when we try to see the personalities, those who have associated with the films like Gulzar, and how when Gulzar came to Bombay initially he was engaged in a garage, and thereafter he joined the film industry as some sort of a script writer and lyricist. And after his escapades with this kind of a medium where he became a lyricist and a script writer, how he was associated with Bimal Roy as well as Rishikesh Mukherjee, and thereafter he also directed some of the best films of the Hindi cinema. And in that sense I'd like to talk about, for example, Angur, which was a comedy, and on the other hand Namkeen, which was talking about the condition of women. So when we tend to analyze, or his first film for that matter, Mere Apne, which was some sort of a take on the political situation in the country. So what we in a way realize is that a number of socio-economic political perspectives they were evident in the films which were made by Gulzar, and his films, they were trying to make us ponder about the kind of situation with which the country was undergoing. So many a times we find that his films were contemporary in nature, with a certain kind of a vision and perspective, and they wanted the audience to think about that particular kind of a situation. When one is talking about Gulzar, apart from the films which he has written or he has written lyrics for, as songs are an important source of the Hindi films as well. So we find that the way songs they carry forward the story of the films is also very important. And in that context Gulzar has been very meaningful in that sense that his lyrics, they were very meaningful. They were trying to convey the mood or the kind of tempo of the film. So some of the readings or bibliography which one can refer apart from the films which have been made by him, Nasruddin Munni Kabir's Jia Jale, the stories of songs, Nasreen Munni Kabir, In the Company of a Poet, Sehbal Chatterjee, Echoes and Eloquences, Meghna Gulzar, Because He Is, Gulzar et al., Encyclopedia of Hindi Cinema. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about Gulzar, apart from a number of poetry or books, a number of books on poetry which he has written. So, and he has not only written in Hindi, he has written in Urdu, he has written in English as well. So he has a vast range in that sense. And when one talks about the personality of Gulzar, that how when he came to the film industry, the kind of sensitivity and the sensibility which was reflected in the lyrics which was written by him. And we also find that he has been awarded at different levels, whether the Padma Bhushan in 2004 or Dada Saheb Phalke Award later. So his contribution to the cinema has been immense, and he was also able to secure one Academy Award and one Grammy Award as well. And when you see that he was born in 1934 as Sampuran Singh Kalra, and thereafter when he shifted to Mumbai, he came from the region of Pakistan when India got divided. So this kind of violence or the trauma of partition which he saw could also be seen as being reflected in the cinema with which he was concerned. We also find that how his films, they were concerned with the reality as well as they appear to be quite ordinary as well. And so he has this kind of a multifaceted personality, where he was not only writing dialogues and the scripts as well as a lyricist, but at the same time he directed many of the films as well. So in that sense, when we see his contribution to the Hindi cinema has been immense, and the way he received awards at the international level, that he won the Academy Award for the Best Original Score for Jai Ho in Slumdog Millionaire, and some of the scholars like Ganesh Anantaraman, they have described Gulzar's lyrics with the purposeful mixing of the senses to be daringly defiant. And he writes in Urdu, Punjabi, several other dialects of Hindi such as Braj Bhasha, Khadi Boli, Haryanvi and Marwadi. And how in his films, the films which he has directed, we find the stories of the human relationships, they are intertwined in the social issues. So he is also connected with the kind of reality in which we live, and that reality is quite understandable to him. And we find that whenever he was involved in writing of the lyrics for the various songs, and these lyrics, they conveyed the meanings in the film, how they carried the tempo of the film. For example, मोरा गोरा रंग ले ले इन बंदनी, और हमने देखी है उन आँखों की महक की खुशबू, देन तेरे बिना ज़िंदगी से कोई, चप्पा चप्पा चरखा चले, देन छैया छैया विच बिकेम पॉपुलर इन अ फिल्म कॉल्ड दिल से, और कजरारे इन बंटी और बबली, and then Jungle Jungle Baat Chali Hai Pata Chala Hai in the Jungle Book, which was a series which was telecasted on Doordarshan. And this particular Jungle Jungle Baat Chali is still so popular, and the generation of those times, they are still able to relate with the music and the lyrics of this particular song. So we find that the various songs which he has written over a period of time, they reflect the importance of the song from the point of view of the Indian culture, and how Indian culture is being reflected in the songs which have been written by Gulzar. And when you see that, apart from this, in a film called Guddi, he wrote Humko Ban Ki Shakti Dena, which was a prayer, and how this particular prayer was also sung in many of the schools in later times. Then he wrote the anthem Nazar Mein Rehte Ho for peace campaign Aman Ki Asha, which was sung by Shankar Mahadevan and Rahat Fateh Ali Khan. Apart from that, he also directed TV serials like Mirza Ghalib on Ghalib and Tehreer Munshi Premchand ki, about novels of Premchand. So we find that this kind of a literary bent of mind which Gulzar had was also reflected in the kind of poetry, in the context of the serials which he directed, where both Mirza Ghalib as well as Munshi Premchand, they have contributed a lot to the Hindi writing as well as the Urdu poetry in that sense. And both of them, they have been stalwarts in their own fields. And how Gulzar in a way was trying to not only portray their character on the screen, but he was also trying to bring that kind of a time on the screen by in a way portraying that particular times as well. So we find that the kind of films which were made by Gulzar, in that sense, many of them they became successful from the commercial point of view, but at the same time, the kind of from the critical point of view, they had some kind of thing which was to be offered to the audience. For example, if we talk about Mere Apne, which was made in 1971, and it was Gulzar's first directorial venture. And in this particular film, that how Meena Kumari was brought from a village by a distant relative, and she was expected to work as a maid. She leaves house and stays in a poor area. So we find that this particular film, which in a way saw also the some kind of a clash of Shatrughan Sinha and Vinod Khanna, both of them, and many of the dialogues of this film, they also became quite popular as well. So when you tend to understand that this film was a remake of the National Award winning Bengali film Apanjan, which was directed by Tapan Sinha, and it also in a way reflects the kind of insensitivity of the people, those who are living in the urban areas, that a woman who's an old widow who has been brought from a village by a distant relative, and she is being expected to work as a maid in that particular house. So all these kinds of things were also reflective of the times as well, that how times were changing, and the relationships which existed in the earlier times, they were holding no kind of a meaning. And this film was also reflective of the times as well, that there was a lot of unemployment, and we also find that so slogans regarding poverty, they were also being raised during the 1970s. So that was a period of flux when the expectations of the masses with the elected governments, it was dwindling in some manner, and films like Mere Apne, they try to convey the kind of a despondency which is there in those times. And we have also talked about that how in this particular film, the insensitivity of the family towards the old and poor was also being shown. And finally, when you see that the old lady who was brought from a village, she's caught in the fight between the local fights of the unemployed and the tormented youngsters of those times. And when she dies in one of the fights, that makes them realize the futility of the violence as well. So in that sense, when we try to see the kind of films which were made in those times and what they wanted to convey in that particular period, then we realize that Gulzar had that kind of a sensitivity in those times. And we also see that he also made a film called Parichay, which was made in 1972, and the film is about misunderstanding between a grandfather and his 5 grandchildren, and how Jitendra, who becomes a tutor, he tutors the grandchildren, and he succeeds in removing the misunderstanding. So in this film we also see that how when Sanjeev Kumar was married without the consent, marries without the consent of Pran, who was his father, and how this kind of an acrimony between father and son was created. And the film also shows the attitude of Pran towards music, as he was a businessman. So we particularly see that a very simple kind of a story was also trying to communicate the class distinctions, because when Sanjeev Kumar marries a poor girl who also belonged to a family where music had some kind of a status, higher status, and on the other hand the attitude of Pran as a businessman was very derogatory towards the music. So we find that such kind of a cinema was not only interesting from the point of view of pointing out the kinds of distinctions which were being there in those times, but at the same time it also reflects the self-pride and the ego of the elite class, the people, those who were rich, those who had money. And the realization of the children in the film that their parents' death was not the mistake of their grandfather. He was not aware, though they sent a letter, but he did not receive it. So we find that finally all the family comes together, and the children in the film, they also realize that there lies a soft emotion for the children behind his disciplinary attitude. So Pran, though being shown as a disciplinarian in the film, also has that kind of an emotion where he is soft towards the children, but he does not want to show it, because he feels that if he will show this soft side, then he may not be able to achieve his objective of disciplining the children. Apart from that, we also see some of the films like Koshish, for example, as you can see on the screen, starring Sanjeev Kumar and Jaya Bhaduri, and how they are being portrayed as a deaf and mute couple, and their conflicts and the discomfort and the struggle to carve out a position for themselves in an insensitive society. So they have hope of some kind, they are confident, and they also exhibit the kind of kindness. So we find that both of them, their approach is to live life, to challenge the life, and to fight with the life, and then finally succeed in it. And we also find the character of Asrani, who has been shown as a symbol of deceit and selfishness, though he is part of the family and he is shown to be the brother of Jaya Bhaduri. But at the same time, he is not trustworthy kind of a person, and we find that finally Sanjeev Kumar's son, he finally marries a deaf mute girl. So in the climax we find that this kind of a conflict between the father and the son is shown, because when Sanjeev Kumar's son is offered to marry the deaf and mute girl, he is not very comfortable with this kind of an idea. And when he is being coerced by Sanjeev Kumar, that how his mother and himself, they both of them, they were in that particular kind of a category, and finally he relents as well and marries. So it also in a way conveys the kind of attitude of conformity in those times, that how children, they have to also to be very sensitive towards the needs of not only their parents, but at the same time they also have to be sensitive to the needs of the people, those who are in a way disadvantaged in a certain manner. So this film definitely played an important role in those times to communicate the feelings of the people, those who were disabled in a particular manner, and how these people, they are being treated in the society, that was also being discussed. Then we also see that how a film called Achanak, which was made in 1973, as you can see on the screen as well, and Hindustan Times reports that it was inspired by the real life sensational 1958 murder case K.M. Nanavati versus State of Maharashtra, and the story revolves around Major Khanna, who is Vinod Khanna, who was in love with his wife, and he finds out about the affair of his wife with his best friend. So this kind of a news, how it devastated him and in a way forced him to kill both of them, and then he finally turns himself into the police. He goes to in a way surrenders in that sense. And we also see that in one of the scenes in the police shooting, he is hospitalized, where he becomes emotionally attached to the doctors, played by Om Shivpuri, Yasrani, and the nurse Farida Jalal. And when all these people, they in a way come to know that he is sentenced to be hanged, then all of them, they feel very devastated, because the kind of emotional scenes which were there in this particular film between the doctors and the patients, they tried to narrate that how good the person he was. So this film was dealing with a contemporary issue, as this kind of a case became quite popular in many of the newspapers. They covered this particular kind of a case as well. So apart from that, we also find that Gulzar was not only concerned with the socio-economic issues, but he was also concerned with the political issues as well. And the film called Andhi, which was made in 1975, in which Sanjeev Kumar and Suchitra Sen, both of them, they acted. And it was alleged that the film was based on the life of the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her relationship with her estranged husband. And on the other hand, scholars like V. Gangadhar, they've argued that, but in reality, only the look was inspired by the politician Tarikeshwari Sinha and Indira Gandhi. And this film was in a way banned during the national emergency of 1975, a few months after its release. So we find that how generally in those times, if one was trying to show some kind of a political content in the films, and how this political content was being taken by the censors, and how politicians, they were also sensitive to such kind of a cinema which was dealing with their lives. And when this film came, many of the songs of the films, they were quite popular, and this film in that sense is trying to not only convey the political situation of the country, but at the same time It was also trying to convey the human relationships in a certain way, that even how though people they belong to some sort of a political party, but even then they have their own personal sides. So in 1977 we find that how this film was cleared by the Janata Party, and it was premiered on Doordarshan as well. And the films looks at life of a career-minded woman in political arena, which is dominated by men, and her conflict with, in a way, her role as well as a dutiful wife, that has also been shown in the film, and how she gives the career some kind of a precedence over her personal life, that has also been shown. So this kind of a conflict between the family life and the professional life is being exhibited in this particular film. And we also find that how the issue of women, how they were not considered to be very important in the Indian context, and they had to abide by what was being decided by the men of the family. So even her role in the political sphere was not in a way liked by a number of men, those who saw her as some kind of a challenge to their authority and her position. But because of her strength and because of her dedication, she is trying to carve some kind of an important place for herself in the political sphere. So this particular film was also some kind of a conflict between herself, as well as the kind of a situation which is being reflected in the society, which is largely patriarchal in nature. So in the next lecture we will further talk about Gulzar. Thank you very much.